So good evening everyone, welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy, the Hindu News Analysis. So today is 20th June 2025 and today we have some very important and most interesting news articles for the discussion. So one by one we'll try to discuss all these important topics in a very detailed and in-depth manner. So without any further delay, let's get into the discussion and let's try to understand all these important topics which are given in different newspapers in an in-depth manner. And first most important topic, and in fact this has been asked this year prelims examination, and there is also a very high possibility or chance of this question might be asked by UPSC in upcoming mains examination as well. And this article has been given in the Indian Express newspaper, and this article specifically talking about the critical minerals and the supply chain resilience with respect to critical minerals, and how critical minerals are concentrated in very few countries and what India should do to achieve supply chain resilience. In fact, critical minerals are very important for a country like India. So therefore we'll try to understand critical minerals in a very detailed manner, so that this discussion will be certainly helpful for your prelims and mains examination. And you can see here what are exactly the critical minerals. And in fact, when I say critical minerals, so those are the minerals which have the economic importance. So they are also important for the national security as well. And in fact, one thing that we should understand, India has climate commitments. India has its own climate goals. So in order to achieve climate commitments, climate goals, we need to focus on renewables, right? And we need to focus on electric vehicles. However, in order to manufacture the electric vehicles, we require critical minerals on a large scale. So therefore, in order to transition, in order to shift ourselves into green technologies or clean technologies, we require critical minerals on a large scale. So I hope you have understood this. So critical minerals are any minerals which have the economic importance, and they play a very important role in economic development and national security as well. However, their associated economic impact is higher than any other raw materials. So if you take any other raw material, but critical minerals play a very important role. Now, why the critical minerals or the minerals are considered as critical? Why they are considered as very important? Because so they are very essential for clean energy transition that India has been looking for. And in fact, the world has been looking for the transitioning towards the clean energy. So in order to make a transitioning towards the clean energy, we require the critical minerals. And in fact, so when we talk about the critical minerals, so the concentration of these critical minerals is limited to very few countries. For example, China, or I can say that the lithium triangle in Chile, Argentina, Bolivia. So therefore they are highly concentrated in very few countries. And in fact, countries like India are dependent on other countries to import these critical minerals. So therefore there has been an over dependency on the other countries. And in fact, the supply shocks or supply risks are also associated with these critical minerals. Recently, the news that we already discussed about that China stopped supplying some critical minerals to India. So that actually disrupts the supply chain resilience on critical minerals, right? So in fact, there are some industries which actually rely or depend on critical minerals. For example, the telecommunication, electronics, energy, aerospace, medical, defense, transportation, and agriculture. So these are some important sectors which depend on the critical minerals. Now, a detailed article has been given in Indian Express, so we'll try to discuss that particular article. And it is being said that the evolution of human civilization over a period of time last 10,000 years, I would say. So it is actually linked with the use of metals, right? So it is actually linked with the use of metals. Now, last 7,000 years, so civilization actually made a great leap from the Neolithic age to the Chalcolithic age. Now, the Chalcolithic age was the age where the human civilization increasingly started associated itself with the metals, and in fact subsequently it started growing more advanced, and it moved to the Bronze Age and then to the Iron Age, right? So therefore we can say that the human civilization is intrinsically linked with the metals, right? Now we are calling them as minerals. Since they are very important, we are calling them as critical minerals. Now we have industrial revolutions, the first industrial revolution, second industrial revolution, third, and now we are at the advent of the fourth industrial revolution. Now the coal-fired, coal-powered, the first industrial revolution of the 19th century and early 20th century, right? So coal was an important raw material, so that has powered the first industrial revolution. So followed by that, oil and its derivatives, so they actually fueled the second industrial revolution. So first industrial revolution was guided by the coal, and second industrial revolution was guided by oil and its derivatives, right? So the second industrial revolution took place primarily during the second half of the 20th century, but the first industrial revolution took place during the 19th century and early 20th centuries. But now we are living in a 21st century. Now it is being said that this 21st century, the age that we are living, is an age of critical minerals, right? This 21st century is called as age of critical minerals because of the importance that the critical minerals actually have. And if you regularly follow the news, even you regularly follow our discussions, so recently Donald Trump came up with the plans to annex Canada or Greenland. So he very often says that he wanted to annex Canada and Greenland as well. Now why Trump wanted to do that? Because Canada and Greenland houses a huge resources of the critical minerals. Because of the vast mineral wealth these two countries have, Trump wanted to annex these countries. And in fact, recently we have also seen some interest from US President Donald Trump to mediate or to end the Russia-Ukraine war as well. Now why US President Donald Trump wanted to end the Russia-Ukraine conflict? Because Ukraine again houses a huge resources of critical minerals. So Ukraine actually has a huge resources of critical minerals. So that can be considered as the only reason that US President Donald Trump is interested in solving the Russia-Ukraine conflict and the potential for a US access to Ukraine's rich mineral resources. So if there is an end in Russia-Ukraine war, that could possibly give US access to Ukraine's rich mineral resources. So, you can understand how critical minerals are very, very important. Now, US is considered as a technological superpower, a military superpower. And in fact, a country like US has been looking for the critical minerals around the world. Now, critical minerals are also the factors which have been shaping the geopolitics and geoeconomics around the world. Now, the minerals, particularly the critical minerals, have taken the center stage in the global trade war as well. because China is generally known for having a huge dominance and control over some critical minerals as well as the rare earth materials as well. Now China is using its disproportionate control or dominance over these rare earth materials, and these rare earth materials are also very important for some industries. For example, the defense sector, aerospace sector. So for all these different sectors, rare earth materials are very important. Now China has been threatening US using its disproportionate control over the rare earth materials and rest of the world with a debilitating consequences of restricted supply. So if China wanted, it can immediately restrict the supply of these critical minerals, and that is how China has been threatening the world, right? So therefore, supply chain resilience of these critical minerals is very important for all these countries, including India. Now we'll understand some other important details with respect to the critical minerals. Now the only natural resource that figured in the context of international security or strategy so far, the only natural resource which has been figured in, which has got the focus and the attention in international security and strategy so far was oil alone, right? So since then two things have happened. So what are the two things that have happened after oil has been recognized in the international security and strategy rhetoric? Now the first thing was there has been a growing consciousness about the climate change. So this is obvious fact that climate change is now a reality, and several parts of the world have been experiencing the extreme weather and climate related events. So there is also a growing consciousness that we need to act against the climate change, firstly. The second thing that has happened was the technological advancement that took place in all these years, and now we are experiencing the fourth industrial revolution, right? So there are two factors: the fourth industrial revolution that we are experiencing and the growing consciousness about the climate change, and there is a growing consciousness to act against the climate change, right? So I hope you have understood. So these two factors that have happened so far, and in fact the technologies which are required to mitigate climate change, because climate change is a challenge and we need to address climate change immediately. However, if we wanted to address climate change, if we wanted to mitigate the climate change, so we need some technologies, right? So we need to have the access to some technologies, so thereby enabling a substitution of fossil fuels like coal and oil. So I will tell you one thing, that the fossil fuels, now what is the problem with burning fossil fuels? So if we burn these fossil fuels, they release the greenhouse gas emissions, and these greenhouse gas emissions are responsible for what? They are responsible for the global warming, and this global warming, the very same global warming, will result in climate change. It will result in what? It will result in climate change. So we need to address this climate change. So in order to address this climate change, we need to have access to some technologies, right? So these technologies actually require a huge amount of critical minerals, right? So these technologies require access to the critical minerals. So in order to address the climate change, what we require? So we require critical minerals. So that is the first thing. And in fact, the electric vehicles that we have been looking for, right? Because with the increased use of electric vehicles, so we reduce our dependence on vehicles which specifically run on fossil fuels. right? So there are some vehicles which specifically run on fossil fuels, and again, if we use fossil fuel based vehicles, it will lead to climate change. It will lead to global warming because they release greenhouse gas emissions, and it also result in air pollution as well, right? So therefore, in this context, so if we wanted to manufacture electric vehicles, right, because they would not release any air pollutants, so no air pollution and no greenhouse gas emissions with the electric vehicles. So if we wanted to manufacture the electric vehicles, right, so these electric vehicles actually require 6 times the minerals that the conventional vehicles uses, right? So as of now, those vehicles which run on fossil fuels, for example petrol diesel vehicles, so they are conventional vehicles. But if we wanted to manufacture the electric vehicles, we require 6 more times of these critical minerals than the conventional vehicles, because the electric vehicles battery is largely made up of what? It is made up of critical minerals like lithium, cobalt and nickel. So I hope it is clear for you. So I'm explaining why the critical minerals are very important for the countries, right? So first thing is that fourth industrial revolution, and the second thing is that growing consciousness about the climate change. And now we are also focusing on renewable energy resources, both wind energy plus the solar energy. Now this renewable energy infrastructure, so the power that we generate through these renewable resources are also the mineral intensive. They also require a huge amount of critical minerals. For example, an offshore wind infrastructure project, so that can actually consume 9 times the minerals that a conventional power plant requires, right? So electric vehicles require 6 times more minerals, and the offshore wind mills would require 9 times more minerals. So therefore, they are the mineral intensive. Even if a country wanted to make a transitioning into the clean energy resources, so they need access to the critical minerals. Now the fourth industrial revolution, which actually involves artificial intelligence, robotics, big data, so this is also a mineral intensive industry, right? So this is also a mineral intensive industry. For example, any digital or digital connectivity infrastructure, so that actually require copper on a large scale, right? So therefore, all these factors make it countries looking for the critical minerals. But here the problem with the critical minerals, or the biggest risk to the emerging landscape, is heavy concentration in the supply of these critical minerals. What does it actually mean? Now these critical minerals are not found all across the world. These critical minerals are not found in almost all countries. A very few countries have a dominance or control over these critical minerals, and that is the problem here. And there are 2 stages of a value chain that are of concern. Now the first stage is that extraction of metal ore from the surface. So we need to extract the metal ore from the surface, and the second stage is processing of that ore into a usable metal, right? So we need to process that ore into a usable metal. And similarly, there is a high degree of concentration in the first, right? When it comes to extraction of these critical minerals, there is a high degree of concentration. That means only few countries have these critical minerals extraction facilities, extraction capabilities. Now this has been asked in UPSC examination. In 2024 examination, UPSC has asked this. Cobalt comes almost exclusively from Congo. And this year, UPSC examination 2025, UPSC has asked this. So Indonesia dominates mining of nickel, right? So almost 50% of the global supply of nickel comes from Indonesia. So remember that UPSC has asked these 2 things this year. So therefore you have to remember this, because this is very very important even for your mains examination as well. And China alone accounts for around 2/3 of the rare earth elements, right? So it alone accounts for 2/3 of rare earth elements. Australia, Chile, China account for the majority of the lithium mining, right? So therefore, when only few countries have dominated or controlled the entire critical minerals, so that means other countries like India have depended on these countries to have access to the critical minerals. Now in processing too, there is a complete dominance across the board by just one country, that is China as well, right? So around 66% of the processing of critical minerals, including the copper and aluminum, takes place in China, right? So 66% is huge. So China has a huge dominance when it comes to the extraction of the critical minerals and processing of the critical minerals as well. And in fact, for rare earth elements, the processing capability of China goes up to 90%. So China alone can actually bring the global electric vehicle industry to a complete halt or a complete standstill by restricting the supply of rare earth elements. Now in this context, countries like US, countries like India should focus on achieving the supply chain resilience. They need to focus on both extraction as well as the processing of these metals. So because they are very important in order to act on climate change or to address the climate change through developing mitigating technology, because these technologies also require critical minerals. So secondly, if we wanted to develop the renewable energy resources, then also we require critical minerals. If we wanted to develop electric vehicles, then also we require critical minerals. There are certain sectors which are very important. They again require the critical minerals. So therefore India needs to have collaborations with a number of other countries. So we need to widen our sources to secure access to the critical minerals, and we should not depend on only one or two countries to achieve our supply chain resilience. We need to widen the scope and we need to widen the basket as well. I hope you have understood this. And the next important topic is about the pulses and oil imports in India. So we'll understand the pulses and oil import trends, and what exactly the cost of pulses and oil imports in India, and how it is going to how it is a detrimental thing to import pulses and oil from other countries for the farmers in India. So we'll try to understand this, and this article has been given in the Indian Express newspaper, and this is a very important for both prelims and mains examination as well. Now it is being said that pulses and oilseed farmers all across India, they are facing a persistent crisis. Now why they are facing this a long-term crisis? Because there is a lack of a government procurement, right? So how the government has been procuring rice and wheat in a systematic manner as part of the MSP regime. So there is a lack of such a systematic government procurement when it comes to the pulses and oil seeds, and that is why the farmers have been facing a persistent crisis, right? So as I have already mentioned that rice and wheat, for the procurement of both rice and wheat, there is a systematic government procurement that is already in place, and that actually benefits from the public procurement system that is already in place. However, when we talk about the crops like moong, chana, masoor, soybean, so they are actually sold in the open markets at rates well below their MSPs. Why? Because there is a lack of a systematic government procurement like rice and wheat in India, and that's why the farmers have been facing the distress. Farmers have been facing the crisis. Now this disparity between the rice, wheat and the pulses and oilseed leaves The farmers who have been cultivating the pulses and oil seeds vulnerable to market fluctuations and thereby forcing them to sell at a loss-making prices despite using high yielding and recommended crop varieties. Right? So I hope you have understood the context of this article. Now we have some data with respect to the imports of pulses into India. Now, in fact, India is the country which is the largest producer of the pulses and largest consumer of the pulses as well. So you have to remember this fact. India is the largest producer of pulses and largest consumer of pulses. Now, India so far imported 7.3 million tons worth of pulses, 7.3 million tons of pulses. They are worth of 5.5 billion in the financial year 24 and 25. And this year's total pulses imports actually surpass a previous record of 6.6 million tons worth of 4.2 billion. So they were imported in the year 2016 and 17. And in fact, this is actually a jump from the average 2.6 million tons imported annually between 2017-18 to 22-23. Now, in fact, so it was said that India has achieved self-sufficiency when it comes to the production of pulses. But past gains in the self-sufficiency have actually been reversed, because so India had achieved a relative self-sufficiency in pulses without rising to 27.3 million tons in 21-22 and 26.1 million tons in 22-23. So that is primarily because of high yield that we have achieved during this period and a development of the short duration varieties of chana and moong. So because of these factors, India almost achieved self-sufficiency in pulses production. However, so these gains that we have achieved in pulses production were undone by the El Nino induced drought. Now we all knew what exactly is an El Nino. So during the El Nino years, the Eastern Pacific Ocean waters would be warmer than the Western Pacific Ocean waters, and that would substantially impact the southwest monsoon, because we knew that around 75 to 80% of the rainfall is caused through the southwest monsoon, and El Nino significantly impacts the southwest monsoon. Right? So whatever self-sufficiency gains that we have achieved, they are actually reversed by a severe drought that is caused primarily because of El Nino. And that has reduced production to 24.2 million tons, recovering only slightly to 25.2 million tons in 24-25. And even some duty cuts also trigger import surge as well. Right? So with retail inflation in pulses actually hitting the double digit in mid 2023, so the government has actually slashed import duties, prompting a surge in imports. Because understand one thing here, that when we are importing pulses into India, so if the import duties are very high, so this actually disincentivizes or restricts excess imports of pulses into India. So thereby it increases the domestic pulses prices and it will benefit the farmers as well. But if the government cut the import duties on the pulses, so there will be the excess import of pulses, right? So excess import of pulses. And if government has been importing an excess amount of pulses, or the private individuals have been importing excess amount of pulses because the government has cut the duties on import of pulses. So that will significantly impact the domestic prices of the pulses, right? So how it impacts the domestic prices of the pulses? So there will be a fall in the domestic prices of pulses, and that could disincentivize the farmers, right? So I hope you have understood this. Now, India's vegetable oil crisis that we have been experiencing, because there is again a rising imports and a farmers distress as well. So this is another problem that the farmers have been facing, right? So there has been a soaring import dependence of the vegetable oils, because so we have some data about the import of the oils. So over the past 11 years, so India's vegetable oil imports are actually doubled. So they actually doubled from 7.9 million tons in 2013 and 14 to 16.4 million tons in 24 and 25, right? So you can see that there is a huge increase in the import of vegetable oil, right? So over the past 11 years, the vegetable oil imports have actually doubled. That is evident from the available data. So in value terms, the imports increased from 7.2 billion to 20.8 billion, and that is primarily driven by the Russia-Ukraine's war. So due to the Russia-Ukraine war, what actually happened? Ukraine is the largest producer of the sunflower oil, right? So because of the Russia-Ukraine war, so there is a limited supply of the vegetable oil, and that has disrupted the supply, and we need to depend on other countries, and there is a substantial increase in the prices of the vegetable oil as well, and that again increased the total bill of importing the vegetable oils, right? So there has been increasing import dependency on the vegetable oils, like how we dependent on pulses. Now there is an heavy reliance or dependence on imported oils in 24-25, because India imported 7.9 million tons of palm oil from Indonesia and Malaysia, and 4.8 million tons of soybean oil from Argentina and Brazil, and 3.5 million tons of sunflower oil from Russia, Ukraine, Argentina. So that has resulted in import dependency of over 60%. So 60% of import dependency. Now, what impact does it actually have on Indian farmers? So increasing dependence on other countries to import vegetable oils and pulses. Now the Soybean Processors Association of India, so it has actually warned that in case if the government reduces the import duty on import of vegetable oils, and that will flood the Indian markets with cheaper oils, and this will further hurt the Indian local prices, and that ultimately hurt the farmers who have been cultivating the vegetable oil crops, right? So this I have already explained, that if government reduces the duties on import of vegetable oils or import of pulses, and there will be a large scale import, and that will ultimately hurt the local prices. And this may discourage the farmers from sowing oil seeds, especially soybean, in the upcoming Kharif season. Now understand, soybean is a Kharif crop, and that will ultimately affect the domestic production, and we continue to depend on the import of the vegetable oils. So therefore, farmers' concerns need to be taken into consideration by the government, and the government should actually encourage domestic farmers to produce more pulses and oil seeds, or vegetable oil crops, so that we can reduce our dependence on other countries for this. So next important topic is a new Green India mission that has been launched by the government. So we'll try to understand about this new Green India mission. So the center has recently revised a roadmap for the national mission for Green India. right? So this updated plan from the government emphasizes not just on increasing or restoring the forest or green cover, but it also focuses on ecological restoration of certain critical areas, right? So there are certain areas which are being identified as a critical areas, for example the Aravalli ranges, Western Ghats, Himalayas and mangroves. So these are identified as the critical areas, and this updated or revised plan emphasizes on not just restoring and increasing the forest cover, but it also focuses on the ecological restoration of these critical areas. And this, as part of India's climate action strategy, the revised Green India mission will also address land degradation, desertification, and further expanding its overall role in building the environmental resilience. Right? So this is the objective of the Green India mission. So what are the achievements of the Green India mission so far? So we'll try to understand the objectives of Green India mission so far. So this Green India mission has been launched in the year 2014 under the National Action Plan on Climate Change. So as part of the National Action Plan on Climate Change, there are around 8 missions have been launched, and out of the 8 missions, the Green India mission was one such mission. And this Green India mission, as part of National Action Plan on Climate Change, aims to increase the forest and tree cover on 5 million hectares and improve the quality of forest cover on another 5 million hectares as well. And this was one of the objectives of the Green India mission. And it also wanted to restore the degraded ecosystems, and it wanted to enhance the forest dependent communities' livelihoods. And from 2015-16 to 2020-21, so this mission supported the tree plantation, afforestation across 11.22 million hectares through various central and state government schemes. Right, so these are some of the objectives of the Green India mission, and you can also go through the objectives and target areas, challenges and importance of a Green India mission that has been already launched or put in place. Now, what exactly is this revised Green India mission? And this revised Green India mission particularly focuses on a strategy to combat land degradation and desertification of the land, and that actually poses some challenges. Right? So here we have the data with respect to the desertification and land degradation. And according to ISRO's desertification and land degradation atlas, so about 97.85 million hectares. So that is around 1/3 of India's land faced degradation in 2018-19. And as part of the National Green India mission, now India even pledged to create an additional carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 billion tons of CO2 by 2030. Right? For example, one thing that we should understand, if we have increased forest cover, so the forest cover would absorb the excess amount of the carbon dioxide. Right? So therefore, the tree cover or the forest cover would act as a carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 billion tons of CO2. So that can be possible through increased forest and tree cover, and therefore there is a need to modify the Green India mission and restore 26 million hectares of degraded land by 2030 under its international climate commitments of United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And there are certain natural carbon sinks such as forests, wetlands, grasslands and mountain ecologies. So they will help absorb the greenhouse gas emissions as well. So in addition to forests, these natural carbon sinks will also help absorb the excess amounts of the carbon. So thereby India will meet its climate objectives or the climate goals of removing the excess carbon out of the atmosphere. And in fact, the forest or tree cover would act as a natural buffer against the impact of climate change contributions. So there are a number of factors: industrial pollution, vehicular pollution, and all these different factors have been contributing to the climate change. And in fact, increasing forest or tree cover would act as a natural buffer against the impact of the climate change contributions. So far, between 2005 to 2021, India actually created an additional carbon sink of 2.29 billion tons of CO2 equivalent, right? So this is the reason that why we have revised the Green India mission, so it will give a renewed push to afforestation and reforestation and creating an additional forest sink through these activities. And apart from that, India will be able to meet its climate goals, its climate objectives as well. And there are certain areas which have been identified as a critical areas, and those critical areas also required enhanced focus, right? So enhanced conservation efforts, and they can be achieved through the revised Green India mission. So the next important topic is Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, and this is also important for your prelims examination. So therefore, we'll try to understand some basic details with respect to Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. So this Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty is a global treaty, and that aims to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons and the technology, while promoting the peaceful uses of nuclear energy and the global nuclear disarmament, right? So one thing that we should understand, the only instance of the use of nuclear weapons by a country against another country was United States of America in the year 1945 against Japan, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So use of nuclear weapons in conventional wars would create a huge destruction. So therefore, there is a need to prevent the proliferation of nuclear weapons by the countries. And there is also a need to prevent the spread of nuclear weapons, and that is why the NPT came into existence. So this Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty was established, or it was signed in the year 1968, and it came into force in 1970. So it is one such treaty where it has a universal ratification, because around 191 parties to this Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. So therefore, it has a universal ratification, so almost universal ratification, except some countries. For example, India not signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. So I'll explain why India has not signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. And along with India, Pakistan, Israel, North Korea, earlier signed, but it withdrew from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in the year 2003. Now, why the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty is in news? So it is in news because of the because of the Israel and Iran, tensions. So Iranian Parliament has been proposing a bill, and this bill may trigger Iran to withdraw its membership as party to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, right? So that's why this Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty is in news. Now, why India is not a party to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty? Because the NPT is a discriminatory in nature, right? So how it is a discriminatory in nature? So NPT is not talking about the complete nuclear disarmament, right? So it is not talking about the complete nuclear disarmament. Rather, it has recognized the 5 countries. It has recognized 5 countries, and they are the nuclear power states. So apart from these 5 countries, no other country should develop the nuclear weapons. So these 5 countries, we already knew that these are the P5 countries of the United Nations Security Council. Only these 5 countries are recognized as a nuclear power states by the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and other countries are not allowed to have the nuclear weapons, right? So India says that it is discriminatory. So if you are talking about the disarmament, a non-proliferation of nuclear weapons, so all countries, including the P5 countries, should also commit for the disarmament. They should not have the nuclear weapons, and we don't have the nuclear weapons also then, and we will be ready to sign the non-proliferation treaty. What is this that the P5 countries have nuclear weapons and other countries should not have the nuclear weapons, right? So remember, China is a part of the P5, and in this case, if India signs or ratifies the non-proliferation treaty, since India has not recognized as a nuclear power state, India should not possess the nuclear weapons, but China will possess the nuclear weapons, and we face a threat from China's aggression, right? So that is why India never become part of the non-proliferation treaty. I hope you have understood this. Now, what are the key features? So some nuclear states have been defined because it has recognized only 5 states such as UK, US, Russia, France, China. So they are being recognized as a nuclear weapon states that tested the nuclear weapons before 1967 as a nuclear weapon states. And it has proposed for the safeguard system under International Atomic Energy Agency. So this International Atomic Energy Agency will monitor the civilian nuclear programs, so to ensure the nuclear materials are not diverted for the weapons use, to ensure that the nuclear material is not enriched to the weapons grade uranium. And there is also a withdrawal clause that is talked about in Article 10. So this Article 10 actually allows any state to exit the treaty within the 3 months notice if national security interests are at actually risk. Now Iran has been thinking so global coverage, so with 191 member countries, so non-proliferation treaty is one of the world's most universal treaties despite criticism over P5 monopoly over the nuclear weapons. And there is also a verification mechanism under nuclear non-proliferation treaty. So the International Atomic Energy Agency's inspectors conduct regular site visits to verify the compliance and also uphold the integrity of the non-proliferation norms. So I hope you have understood the nuclear non-proliferation treaty. And that's all in this lecture, and thank you so much. And if you like our lecture, please subscribe our YouTube channel and also hit the like button.